actions on WASH. I'm very pleased to be joined by a diverse and excellent panel of speakers today. First off, we're going to hear from my colleague Carlo from Nestlé, from Rami from Water Aid Sweden, and from Nick Weatherall from 2050, who is dialing in. That's going to be the first half of the session today. And then in the second half, we're going to have 3 more speakers who I will introduce afterwards. So I think we're pretty good to get started. In which case, I will hand over now to Carlo to take us through a little bit of context on how Nestlé, as a large food and beverage company, has looked at the issue of WASH in the past, and some of the work that we're doing right now to address that through a human rights due diligence lens. So Carlo, over to you. Thank you.
Well, for sure you can hear me here. I don't know if they can hear me on the Zoom call. In any case, first of all, let me introduce myself very quickly. I'm Director for Water Stewardship at Nestlé, and in this capacity for many years I have been dealing with the design and the execution of water stewardship at our company. That means direct operations and also the agricultural supply chain. Let's say that the history of water stewardship for Nestlé started 150 years ago or more, but clearly, in the interest of time, I need to restrict it at least for the last 10 years. I thought it was interesting to start with the United Nations Resolution for the Human Rights, the respect of the rights for access to water and sanitation. We recognize this human right publicly, and along with that we published immediately after our Nestlé commitment on water stewardship, and as a policy document we put very clearly since the beginning that for us effective water stewardship is first making sure we give provisions for access to water for people, then for ecosystems or nature to function, and then for the efficient use of water in agriculture and industrial activities. So starting with that, it was very clear that we put WASH in the center of our water stewardship strategy, and that meant to us that if you want to be a good water steward in business, you need to first provide water to your people, and then also respect the human right to water and sanitation for those who may be impacted by the activities that you have in your operations and in your value chain. So trying to be very, very concise here, key milestones. We championed the WASH Pledge in 2013, 2014. You know, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development call to action business with the WASH Pledge, which meant for companies to sign to commit providing WASH at good standard for all their people within their manufacturing facilities. We did it. We rolled out, we've been one of the first to champion the pledge, but also one of the first to roll out in all our operations that ban more than 1,000 sites around the world. We implemented the self-assessment tool, and we identified also some gaps that we corrected. Mainly it was related to toilets for disabled people and sometimes issues in the social blocks, because even if it's unwanted, you may have in certain places facilities at different standards for associates, for workers, and for external workers. The WASH Pledge was mainly WASH in our operations. Then we championed, probably you heard that since the very beginning, the Alliance for Water Stewardship Standard, the publication of the standard, the implementation, and also certification in many of our sites. And that, as you probably know, in the second edition, was also introducing WASH as a 5th outcome. And clearly, if you implement the AWS standards, you have also the tools, the indicators, the criteria to manage WASH in your operations, but also starting looking at the sphere of influence of your operations, so at the catchment level. In 2016, we have published the Nestlé guidelines for human rights, respecting human right to water and sanitation, and there we have set somehow the where and the what and the how for WASH in our value chain. trying to also associate the guidelines with some tools and some risk assessment initiatives. I probably don't have the time to speak about it, but it's mainly audit of water resources at the local level, which looks at the technical aspects, so looking at the hydrogeological information, making sure that if there is a potential issue of interference between the pumping of your factories, pumping of water from your wells, and pumping of water at the nearby community, you have the signs to understand if that could be a problem or not, and societal community relation process that is helping to understand better stakeholders and stakeholders' perspectives, and in that also the WASH element. And just to be very close for the first round, the big elephant is always the agricultural supply chain. There we have carried out historically a lot of initiatives, especially in the area of cocoa, coffee, and milk, which are basically our key commodities. And there we have always tried to understand locally what was the problem related to water resources management and WASH. I give you three very quick examples because the contexts are sometimes very different. In Vietnam, we have been carrying out for many years an initiative with the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperations to improve the way water was used in irrigation of coffee. And you would wonder what is the connection with WASH? The problem was that we discovered that the water that was extracted from these shallow wells in the central islands of Vietnam, they're also the same aquifers where the local communities and the local households tap water from for their drinking water supply. So improving the sustainability of water resource management in agriculture, in that case, was also allowing to increase the opportunities to have more sustainable access to water for local communities. That were more physical water scarcity impacting WASH. In other areas, like in the cocoa supply chain in Ivory Coast and Ghana, we have basically worked together with IFRC on the typical issues of WASH, which is not necessarily physical water scarcity, is lack of infrastructures, is what scientists call economic water scarcity, and also pollution sometimes, and this is related to another big issue of sanitation and open defecation. And lastly, I want to mention, because that has been very important initiative for Nestlé, is Manos al Agua in Colombia. We work with more than 10,000 farmers, again, to promote water stewardship at the catchment level, but there was we understood there was a big competition in certain areas between the water used for irrigation of coffee and the water used for drinking in certain communities. Small springs shared by different families. And we understood that working again on water stewardship, we could have had a positive impact on WASH for those communities. And especially in Colombia, that was somehow transforming water from an issue of conflict into a vehicle for peaceful coexistence. So this is a nutshell. Then the reason why we are here, 1 minute, is that we landed at a certain point understanding that although we have done many good things, there are many remaining challenges, especially in the agricultural supply chain. And this is why we decided, also because we have launched this year the human rights framework at Nestlé, and we have identified 10 salient issues, one of them in human rights to water sanitation. We decided to stop for a moment and make a thorough, bold review of what we are doing on WASH at Nestlé. We are supported by a specialist consultant, 2050, who is also on the call today. And we have committed to go for a due diligence, a gap assessment of all our WASH process, and publish by the end of the year an action plan on human rights to water and sanitation at Nestlé. So I would stop here because especially Nick from 2050 will speak about it.
Sure. Yeah, thank you very much, Carlo, for that background context on what we're doing at Nestlé and why we're here today. I'd like to hand over now to Rami from WaterAid. If you could take us through your view on this, that would be great. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. So good morning, everybody. My name is Rami Narte. I'm with WaterAid, working as a senior partnership manager, currently managing the Swedish government contracts, but I have more than 10 years experience in private sector engagement in this sphere. So I'm happy to represent WaterAid on the stage, and thank you for inviting us, Owen. Meeting you, Carlo, as well. So I just wanted to go back a little bit and revisit some of the basics before we have a very exciting session ahead of us, and I wasn't sure that everybody's familiar with some of the protocols that are relevant. So in 2010, and some corporates have been working on human rights.
Do you want me to go to that
Yes,
slide?
please.
Yeah, okay.
So we can go to the first slide.
I'm not entirely sure how this is working, but we're down here, aren't we? Yeah. So the cursor is quite difficult to see. There we go. Okay.
Great, fabulous.
Right.
Thank you. So in 2010, the UN General Assembly adopted the human rights to water and sanitation, and many of you don't know that. And that was a really, really big win for the wash sector, who has been lobbying for that for quite some time. And what does that entail? It entails that water should be affordable, available, accessible, and acceptable in terms of quality and safety. What I would suggest for everybody who's interested to learn more to visit the CEO Water Mandate's 2015 guidance on business and human rights. So the human rights to water, who are the duty bearers? Technically, it's the government that has the primary duty to deliver the human right to water. However, corporates have a responsibility to respect the human right to water, and that involves avoiding having adverse impact in their operations, in their supply chains, and for the product use, and working also proactively to mitigate negative impacts on the human rights to water and sanitation. There's also one more aspect, and that is there should be good or sufficient remedy mechanisms to compensate or to address those who have been, the issues of those who have been affected by human rights. So in 2011, the UN Human Rights Council adopted 31 principles on human and business and human rights, including Principle 17, which we'll be talking about more today, which is specifically focused on human rights to due diligence. And really the summary of that is that all duty bearers have to protect, respect, and remedy. On Principle 17, it requires corporates to commit to doing due diligence in their operations, in and around their operations, to assess, act, and report. One key aspect of that is that size matters. So I mean, the company has to address those impacts out of a size consideration for their operations, but also out of the a risk view of how they affect human rights in different contexts, right? And one third aspect that's important here is that due diligence should not be seen as a box-ticking exercise, but rather should be an ongoing process where we reassess how corporates are affecting or impacting human rights, because situations change throughout. Next, please. So we at WaterAid have a rights-based approach rather than a needs-based approach to engage with the private sector. And the difference there is that a needs-based approach focuses quite a lot on the quantitative side, trying to get as many people to get access to water and sanitation, which is great, something that we do, but we go beyond that. What we do is strengthening systems to address power imbalances, to address access to marginalized communities, and get collective action towards achieving the universal human rights in the areas where we operate. So I strongly invite you to check out our private sector journey and how we work with the private sector. There are quite interesting sessions coming up on that. So next, please. What we've seen throughout the years are great commitments by companies, and one of the things, according to Principle 16 of the UN Guiding Principles on Human Rights and Business Human Rights, companies are supposed to take, the first step companies should be doing is to take, formulate their policy commitments towards the human right to water and sanitation, among other human rights. And we've seen really great examples from the companies that we're in dialogue with throughout the years. Here are a few of them. What we also seen, and as Carlo was pointing out earlier, are a lot of challenges on the ground in terms of power dynamics, in terms of divergent mandates, the capacity of regulators, enforcement, compliance, location versus context, long-term versus short-term thinking, meaningful stakeholder engagement, collective action. Everybody talks about it, very few get it right. So next slide, please. That's my. There is we're also, from our experiences in the agriculture sector, where we've been engaging with some companies on smallholder farmings at scale. And what we've learned so far are a few lessons that I'd like to share with this group, and that's there is a need for full understanding of the workplace environment, of the context where the corporates work and the catchments, the crop seasons, the governance mechanisms, the way society is organized, the way farmers are organized, and the different habits and where people live, how they live, the kind of habitats that they have. There's also a need to have a holistic wash approach. We can't provide hand hygiene without looking at the water supply side of things, and how sanitation feeds into that mix. So we have to have a whole wash perspective there. We have to have flexible timelines and expectations because there are so many changing dynamics on the ground. And we have to plan for the impacts of climate change because that is changing precipitation patterns, etc. And last but not least, what I wanted to say is that at 11 o'clock, we'll be launching a new report showing the impact stories from different work areas where we've been engaging with corporations. I advise you to join us at the session at 11 in room 327, just one floor down. I think I'll stop here.
Great.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Rami, for those insights, and pleased to say I'm signed up for the event coming up next.
Great.
So back-to-back wash this morning. Thank you for that. I'm going to go now to our online speaker, who is Nick Wetherall from 2050. 2050 is a consultancy that Nestlé is working on pulling together our human rights due diligence action plan on WASH. So hopefully we will hear from Nick right now.
Good morning, everyone. Can I just check? Can you hear me?
We can hear you. We can't see you yet. Right, we've got your presentation up, so yeah, you're good to go.
That's coming through now. Is that looking all right?
Looking good. Thank you.
Okay, super. Thank you. Well, thanks very much. I'm going to just give a few perspectives that very much complement, I think, what Rami has just outlined and Carlo previously about the work that we've got underway, helping Nestlé examine their human rights due diligence approach to the WASH risks in their business. Little bit about us. We're a management consultancy with more than 18 years of experience guiding companies on the human rights due diligence journey across multiple sectors and very much with a global reach. Yes, we really are focusing as a priority on capabilities to conduct effective human rights due diligence. Our approach and the model that we sort of evaluate companies against is very much informed by the UN Guiding Principles that Rami just referred to, and also the OECD guidance for responsible business conduct, which operationalizes, I think, those principles in a very pragmatic way. So on the right of the screen here, you'll see our sort of cycle of continuous improvement that we believe companies should embark upon to conduct effective human rights due diligence. It breaks down into several key steps. One is about embedding the right policies, systems, procedures, and practices across the business so that salient human rights issues remain very much in scope, visible, and under the vigilance of the company. That those systems and procedures help to surface key risks and impacts caused by the business or that the business contributes to, and enables the business to prioritize those that are most severe in terms of the harm that they cause or the number of people impacted, and that those systems and practices also trigger a response to address the concerns identified. And that is often through a company either ceasing the action that causes harm or preventing the harm in the first place, or mitigating the consequence of it. Obviously, none of this happens behind the scenes and in a vacuum. I think it's incredibly important that companies are tracking their performance, both in terms of the measures that they take to address risks, but also the effectiveness of those measures. And I think a key linchpin of the guiding principles in this whole sort of new movement on human rights due diligence is one of transparency, that information is communicated publicly so that consumers and rights holders themselves can evaluate the performance of companies in managing these risks. Finally, for us, the other key principle is that rights holders should be engaged throughout the process and their views and perspectives incorporated into the due diligence cycle. This is all happening. Rami mentioned the UN guiding principles as a very key starting point where we had sort of a emerging framework to guide business practice. And since then, we've really had a snowballing of domestic laws, so more hard law coming into place in certain economies and certain markets. And now I think all eyes very much on the European Union and the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, which was released earlier this year as a draft. That's a very key piece of obviously potential legislation with huge implications for businesses in Europe. The expectation is that it's adopted at some point early next year, probably, and will enter into force around 2025. It'll apply to all EU companies with more than 150 million euros of turnover or 40 million euros of turnover in higher risk industries and businesses. It will also apply to foreign overseas businesses that have similar volumes of turnover in the European market. It's full scope human rights due diligence, so across the assess, address, and report cycle. And it covers the entire operations of a business, so not just their own operations, factories, plants, but also those of their suppliers all the way through the value chain. So a very, very significant and imminent piece of legislation coming. So with this in mind, but also because Nestlé has been extremely engaged on human rights broadly and the human right to water and sanitation, as Carlo mentioned, they've asked us to help them understand where they are on that journey in relation to WASH. So we're conducting a gap assessment at the moment, looking at where there might be gaps in that perfect cycle I just described. And then we'll be developing an action plan for them to roll out over the coming years by the end of this year. So it's a work in progress. I would, we're still assimilating findings from the research that we're doing. It's extensive interviews and a lot of desk review. So I'll just focus on some of the things that we're actually looking at on a more granular level. Obviously, we're looking at the policy, the framework of policies and procedures that Nestlé has, the extent to which they are applied to the entirety of their business. So as I said, own operations, communities around plant sites, factories, etc. They're tier one suppliers, and also upstream in the supply chain to the base, particularly farmers who are growing commodities that Nestlé utilizes. And the key question for us is, is WASH full scope, as in, water, but also sanitation as a right, and also at Nestlé's request, looking also at hygiene as a key enabler, both of the right to water and sanitation, but also other fundamental rights, such as the right to health and education. So is full scope WASH sufficiently integrated into those policies and practices? I think the other thing we're looking at, because this is a key indicator of genuine embedding, is the extent to which Nestlé's handling of WASH risks in its business is sufficiently integrated into its corporate governance. When it comes to identifying WASH risks and impacts, one of the things we're looking at is really the data that Nestlé is using to assess baseline risks. Obviously, it's a global corporation, and working out where to begin is pretty complex. But obviously, data is at the heart of understanding baseline risks. And so, is the data up to date? Is it inclusive of that full scope of WASH issues? Does it reflect sort of best practice, etc.? And then the other question, one of the key questions we're asking is, if in those geographies or those commodities where risks are through baseline data identified to be high, what is Nestlé doing to put in place more routine and ongoing continuous risk monitoring mechanisms so that it never has a blind spot in high risk areas? When it comes to remediation, very key issue is, when risks are identified, is there a timely and proportional response to those risks, allowing them to be either ceased or prevented or mitigated? And are those responses backed by adequate resources? And one thing we often see with businesses is very, a very typical moment, I think, is an inflection from a lot of businesses doing good work, more with a corporate social responsibility lens. And often that does mean that some of the more tricky issues don't necessarily get addressed. So, making sure there's not a tendency to address low-hanging fruit when there are more fundamental, more severe risks and impacts that need to be addressed. When it comes to tracking, again, this comes down to the data, the KPIs that maybe Nestlé is using to not just to verify the integrity of its HRDD processes, but also the WASH impacts arising from those processes. And are those KPIs, do they inform a public reporting so that there is an adequate degree of transparency around all of these efforts? And finally, in terms of engaging rights holders, a lot of companies, Nestlé included, have grievance mechanisms, but one thing we see is that they're often quite dominated by labor rights issues. So we need to look at the design of grievance mechanisms and make sure that they are sort of actively permitting and encouraging rights holders to raise concerns about WASH specifically. And then also the other key thing is, is the data that's utilized within all of this sufficiently granular so that it's reflective of rights holder realities? So that's just a taster for some of the things we're looking into. I'm sure we've whetted your appetite for the results and findings, which will come later. The idea, all things going well, is that there will, I believe, be a consultation process with external stakeholders that Nestlé will run in the course of the next couple of months, with a view to finalizing and launching an action plan focused on Nestlé's work in their work to respect the human right to water and sanitation by the end of the year. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Nick. We haven't actually seen you yet, but we've seen a great presentation and heard from you and heard you very loud and clear there on the message around the work being carried out for Nestlé. I wanted to just quickly follow up with a question to you, if possible, which is around beyond Nestlé. Are you seeing a significant increase in interest from companies in this area, given that regulatory aspect you talked about? And from your work with other companies, do you think there is a sufficient level of understanding of the implications of those measures that might be coming through on the regulatory side?
Yeah, good question. Can you see me now? Not that it's essential, but
we can. Yeah, I've got
okay,
you
great
on the screen now. Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah, I mean, for sure, we're seeing an uptick in interest for the kind of work that we can do with companies and the work we can do to help companies in view of the impending EU regulation, for sure. Having said that, the European Commission estimates that the new directive will implicate about 13,000 European businesses and 4,000 foreign businesses. So, in some respect, I think we're still seeing front runners getting on the front foot. And given that the law is a few years out, probably not everyone is yet mobilizing to do it. But where we've got actual laws more imminent, for instance, in Germany with the German Supply Chain Act, there we see also a noticeable increase in demand and interest in what we do with companies. So yeah, and when it comes to the implications, I mean, I think the front runners that I've just described, are gauging the implications well, including many of the very real pain points that come with a process like this. It's about overhauling your supplier codes, your procurement practices, integrating due diligence into your management and governance DNA in a way, shifting from maybe selective certified supply chains to a whole of supply chain approach, and moving to greater transparency on uncomfortable issues. So these are huge changes that companies need to embrace, and it doesn't happen overnight. Yeah, so the change, the system change is quite, it's significant, and I suppose I'm personally a bit concerned with how much work a lot of companies will have to do to get themselves ready for this law. There may be a looming crunch point on that, but yeah, certainly it's becoming clearer and clearer what will be expected of businesses.
Great, thank you. We are doing very well for time, so thank you to the speakers for sticking to their allocated amount of time. I wondered if we do have a few minutes, if there are any questions in the room or online at this stage. We can take one or two now. So I'll just leave that open and put your hand up if you do have a question. If not, I will maybe just extend that previous question to you, Rami, just to see your view on that as well.
So yeah, I'm interested in, obviously regulation has a very important role. We can see that there are many instances there are really good regulation in place, but enforcement is always an issue due to capacity, due to accountability issues, etc. So it's also important that corporates are also front running this and really driving. Thank you, and really driving some of this work on human rights forward. I'm really interested in what Nick was mentioning on data insufficiency, perhaps, or data maybe asymmetrical data availability, especially when we work in catchments. This is a very important topic, because we see that as well from the perspective of the regulators. Sometimes they do not have the data that corporates have, and there should be mechanisms for information sharing as such in places where there's to drive both good regulation and good corporate responsibility. Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess we need to invest even more in collaboration around that data collection point and understanding and building expertise as well within and outside companies. Yeah, great. Thank you. Okay, Carlo, any reflections on that from your perspective as well?
Well, maybe I can link to your interest in data and the point Nick mentioned. And this is somehow linked to what I was mentioning before on Alliance Water Stewardship. Unfortunately, we have not implemented nor certified all Nestlé sites, and especially we didn't bring AWS standards to the required level of depth in the agricultural supply chain. But it is clear that if at least we implement the AWS standard principles in what we are doing in catchments and also in the agri supply chain, we would have a sort of an indirect way to manage better the data that we collect and based on this information put in place the right actions, because the standards, first of all, require a water steward to identify the local challenge, the shared challenge. So you would first of all try to understand if WASH is one of those challenges, and then address the challenge with all your responses. And because, as I mentioned before, in the standard, since the second version, we have WASH as a fifth outcome, you have all the indicators and criteria to look into the different steps of the process. So you need to gather and understand the WASH data at the catchment level. This is a duty when you implement the standard. And then you need to plan and implement the actions, the WASH related actions. And then, as you know, you need to also evaluate and disclose those actions. So frankly, if I have one way to try to tackle the issue of local data, which most of the times I'm missing, is trying to go through an AWS process, because this is giving you the chance to improve the level of knowledge, both technical and societal.
We are also a member of AWS and I think they're working quite a lot right now on increasing or on developing platforms for data sharing, which is really great. Yeah.
Great. Okay. I think we will wrap that section up now. So thank you, Rami, Carlo, and Nick, for your contributions. Much appreciated. And we're going to do a bit of a substitution here for our next round of speakers. So we've got Truk, Alex, and Leslie who are joining us now, and we're going to hear some more perspectives on this topic before going into a Q&A. So if you do have questions, we can hold them till the end, then that would be great. We will have plenty of time. Okay, so I think we might do a bit of miking up. Yeah. All right. Okay, so we're going to start with Truk from Cargill. So if I could ask you to just introduce yourself and tell us about Cargill's work on WASH, your thoughts on this topic, including the increasing interest in a human rights due diligence approach.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you all for organizing this great session and letting me be part of this. So I'm Truk Smoor. I'm the global water lead for Cargill, and as some of you may know, or some of you may not know, like Cargill is also a company that's over 150 years old. And what we do is we connect, we are an agricultural and food ingredients company, but we connect on one hand farmers and growers and ranchers with their markets, but on the other hand also connect our customers, which is companies like Nestlé, with the feed ingredients that they need to produce the goods. And we do that in a lot of different countries. We have over 150,000 employees operating in 70 countries. And we also see sustainability and as a very core part of how we deliver value for our customers. And our purpose is to nourish the world in a safe, responsible, and sustainable way. So how that connects to WASH is that as we look at what our key priority areas, then we see water is one of them. And when we look at water in a holistic way, which means we look at the availability, the quality, and access to safe drinking water, sanitation, and hygiene. And so with that approach, I actually like to show the full picture. It actually starts, I forgot, like a number of years back, when this first part of the journey is indeed that initial step of awareness and integration into your operations. So I think a lot of how we work at Cargill, because we have so many different businesses, so many different places in the world where we operate and where we originate, we're looking at integrating these essential elements as part of the foundation of how we work. So we've integrated those into our policies, which means that out of our audit programs, our internal audit programs, access to safe drinking water, sanitation, and hygiene is an integral part of that. So we are looking at our operations, at how do we ensure this access, but also to create that ownership in these local communities. That has been part of our policies already for many years, and we see that at that foundational level. 2 years ago, we did an update of our water strategy, and this is where we moved into where can we really have an ability to drive change, and how can we ensure that we are addressing these critical issues where it's needed most. And when we did that analysis, you immediately and clearly see it's like we have to include our agricultural supply chain. So that's when we overlaid where our agricultural supply chain is and how it overlaps with those critical issues where there's availability, water quality, and wash. And that's when we start to drive action and have targets to actually improve that. And to kind of talk about like how we're doing that, I actually want to share a little bit of a story of my very, very early journey, which is a story from more than 20 years ago when I was studying chemical engineering and very much focused on wastewater treatment. And I did an internship in the Philippines. And so I moved there with trying to advance wastewater treatment and really like looking at like better ways and technologies to improve that. And when I arrived there, we did a feasibility of actually like sludge treatment from septic tanks. And pretty soon, pretty fast, we found out like many of these septic tanks are actually covered. And you cannot even take the sludge out unless it's an emergency. And the basic awareness of how to basically manage your septic tanks and how to empty these was actually missing, even with the well-educated members that we engage with. They said like still there is these practical issues that says it's just much easier to put your kitchen on top of your septic tank than to have your septic tank accessible to empty it. And a critical lesson for me was there is that local ownership and that local awareness is so critical. And that's actually how we translate it also in how we're integrating WASH in Cargill's program and its Cargill's program in the agricultural supply chain, is that we're looking at, on one hand, where do we have to prioritize action? And when we look at our supply chain, one of our key ingredients is cocoa. And so when you look at cocoa, and you do that mapping, you obviously see areas like West Africa, like Cameroon and Ghana and Ivory Coast as critical areas. But then when you engage with the business, it's about how they can integrate WASH into their community resilience programs. And as they do their community resilience programs, how they, when they engage their growers in their local communities, how they connect it to their women empowerment program, how they can really like integrate it into the entire approach for these communities to really get that to a next level. So I see that as one critical pathway is working to create that local ownership and that local awareness, but also create holistic programs that are not looking at one silo, but really at these integral solutions that we need to build that resiliency to a next level. We also see that this local community approach is not enough in itself, given the challenge of access to safe drinking water, sanitation, and hygiene. So this is also where we are also looking at alternative approaches, where you can look at financing mechanisms to actually achieve a next level of scale towards really moving the needle. And so we see these two parallel paths as critical part, where you start with the foundation of what is needed that are non-negotiable, that we have to make an integral part on how we're treating wash. And I'm building on the prioritization in these key regions that we have identified in our supply chain. And there look at, on one hand, that local ownership with the businesses, with the communities to really advance at that local level, together with larger partnerships that help us advance at scale.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you for those insights. It's very interesting to hear from another company obviously very well connected to Nestlé as well in terms of our work. Going to move on now to Alex from the Toilet Board Coalition. I saw you nodding along there to several of the points that were raised, so look forward to hearing from you and your perspectives.
Yeah, thank you, Owen. Hi everyone, I'm Alex Knezevich, Managing Director at the Toilet Board Coalition. We were founded by corporates in 2015 to scale and accelerate business solutions to the sanitation crisis. Over the last 7 years, we have accelerated through our accelerator program 50 local SMEs, sanitation businesses that are operating in their own markets and really connected well with their communities. What we see, from this program, so in the program we're partnering really a multinational corporation and an SME to embark on a year of getting to know each other and strengthening each other's businesses. So what we see while doing that is the SMEs receive this intensive business coaching to ensure that their businesses are on the pathway to profitability and to scale. 97% of the graduates of the program are receiving investment or a partnership with a multinational to strengthen their business through our network and our program. Over the last 7 years and those 50 graduates, we facilitated 22 million of investment. What's the most exciting for us, though, is what's happening between that MNC, that mentor, and that SME. Because when you pair two business people together, there's something really magical that comes out of it. They're both ambitious, they're hungry, they want to see their businesses grow. And so innovation thrives in that environment. And so I'll tell a little story on the ground of how that really translates and comes to life. So Pete Dulcamara is Senior Vice President and Head of R&D at Kimberly-Clark. And this year, in our 2022 Accelerator, he selected SatSense Solutions to mentor. Now, SatSense Solutions uses satellite remote sensing technology to monitor natural resources and infrastructure. Pete came into it and was just really curious about the technology, honestly. He liked the team when he interviewed them. He felt there was something in that business that was interesting. As they embarked on the year together, and they're in month 8, they're just finishing month 8 of their relationship, he found that not only was it a really interesting technology, but he had a hunch that it probably was a very relevant technology for Kimberly-Clark. And so in him, that activated something. He started working through Kimberly-Clark's channels and identified how that solution of SatSenses could contribute to Kimberly-Clark's own targets and ambitions. What that means is that now Kimberly-Clark is piloting SatSense Solutions water monitoring technology at one of their factories, and then with plans to scale it up across their operations. Now, that's great in itself. But on top of that, SatSense Solutions, what Kimberly-Clark has done there is unlocks this systematic demand for SatSense Solutions. And so then SatSense has taken that relationship with Kimberly-Clark and that agreement to the European Space Agency, which is perhaps surprising to be talking about at a WASH event, but taken that to them and leveraged it for more funding so that they can grow their operations and serve more corporates like Kimberly-Clark. So we're seeing this, and I'll walk through it. What we're seeing in the accelerator is that as large corporates can partner with local SMEs and integrate them into their supply chain, that unlocks the systematic demand that then de-risks investment. And we think there's something really interesting in terms of our capacity to accelerate progress and actually achieve SDG 6 in this. The mentor, Pete, in this instance, he first of all gets an in-depth understanding of a market that is really unique and different than his day job, highly relevant for his day job, but not that he would have access to in his daily business. Secondly, in the mentorship and in that relationship with SatSense Solutions, he's activating an entrepreneurial spirit within himself, navigating that through his own company and accelerating innovation in his company. And then third, of course, as anyone that's played a mentorship role before, he has the gratification on a weekly basis of working with this growing social business and seeing them accelerate in terms of their capacity to serve. So while companies are looking at human rights due diligence and solutions and how they can activate this, what their action plan is we're talking about today, the question for us is, how do we engage more corporates in looking at local SMEs, vetted local SMEs, to partner with in this process, unlocking that systematic demand and ultimately unlocking that investment? Right now, we have, and Remy was mentioning earlier, we can't solve water without sanitation. We can't solve sanitation without water. We can't solve any of the global goals without water and sanitation. So right now, there are a number of corporates that recognize the relevance of sanitation to their business operations. But of course, many corporates work with people that need water and sanitation, or have water in their operations, or need the nutrients, the resources, potentially the information that's flowing through our sanitation systems on a daily basis. So how do we engage more corporates as they're embarking on this human rights due diligence process to look at the systematic demand that they could be unlocking as they roll out their action plans that will then leverage further investment into this sector and ultimately accelerate our progress on SDG 6. So really looking forward to, I have a bunch of questions for all the other panelists, but I'll stop there, and looking forward to hearing from Leslie as well. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Yes, and we may well hand back to you for the start of the Q&A in that case. But thank you for those important insights and the focus on innovation and engaging with SMEs, which is an important part of acting on these risks. I'd like to hand it over now to our final speaker, Leslie from Global Water Partnership. Thanks very much for being here. And I wondered if you could tell us a bit about your work with other companies and reflections on the topic.
Yeah, thank you. And I want to thank Nestlé for inviting GWP to be here and participate in this conversation. I'm going to pick up actually on an area where Alex was emphasizing as well, and this is on the power of partnerships, right? Because there is a lot of work, and it's exciting to see the work that Nestlé and Cargill and others are doing internally to address the human rights, to address human rights within their supply chain and their work. There's also a lot that can be done through partnering to make sure that those impacts are spread out widely on the ground. And one area where we can, and a relationship that I can highlight from the GWP side, is with our Mediterranean region and how they have partnered with Coca-Cola. The first thing I want to say about this is this relationship has been going on for 16 plus years. And that's huge, right? Because that time gives you a lot of time to really interact with your partner, to really understand how we can work together and keep sort of evolving and co-developing different solutions across the Mediterranean region in this particular case. And in this case, it combines the Coca-Cola Foundation, as well as its local bottling supply, as well as then the local government players and also the GWP network. And over those 16 years, or 16 plus years, we've actually been able to drive over 120 technical different innovations around water security, wastewater treatment, et cetera, in these places. Together, these things collectively add up, and there's a lot more opportunity to do and build these kind of really robust, comprehensive relationships across the board. Taking it a step back into the WASH community, where I've personally spent a lot of time, I can also highlight a couple of other relationships briefly and in certain ways. One that I'll highlight is GAP Incorporated, and I don't have to talk too much about their Women in Water program because I know that they're showcasing it here, and and it is exciting. But what I do think is really interesting about that case is the way in which it absolutely stemmed from a business realization that if they actually provided better wash facilities in their garment factories, their productivity increased. And this realization that this genuinely drove better business inspired them to partner with USAID and other partners such as Water.org, CARE, et cetera, on the ground to really drive a whole program that looked not only at bringing more wash facilities into their factories, but then addressing the larger issue of longer-term groundwater supply for those communities. So I think it's, it's just this idea about this triggering and building and seeing that it isn't always just about wash. It's all about wash facilities, and access are important, but there is also the requisite need to make sure that the longer-term water supply remains there and that we're not having unintended negative environmental consequences. And I'll move from there also to sort of this idea, and this was also touched on by one of the previous speakers, and this also encourages the importance of having accurate data, and really then companies using that data to inform their decisions, to understanding their risk from a water perspective. And this was definitely addressed earlier, but thinking about how this also feeds into water disclosures with CDP, or also, sort of understanding your water footprints. There's a number of different conversations about that happening this week as well. But really understanding how we can take that data about our water use to make the better business decisions, to make the right kinds of partnerships, and to have what at GWP we like to refer to as water alignment in terms of informing financial decisions, as well as understanding relationships across different sectors, because this is a very integrated issue and community, and we're only going to solve this together. And then when I come back, and so then this new train of ideas this is informing our assessment of risk, and this understands our ideas around investment. And finance continues to be a really sort of nascent and important frontier, at least within the water community, that has to be really evolved and considered in different kinds of ways. We've heard about some different ways already from Alex, from our colleague at Cargill. There's so much energy and excitement around here. And if I return to the example I highlighted with GAP and how they've been partnering with USAID to implement on the ground, that's a great idea. What if we took that a step further? A lot of us are talking these days about the green climate funds and how we can really access those. What if we took a partnership with a donor or development agency such as USAID, so Nestlé perhaps partners with something like USAID to access green climate funds, and then USAID provided maybe the risk capital that allowed Nestlé to make an even larger investment on the ground, and really sort of also model for the community what blended finance can look like for comprehensive solutions that really treat access and long-term supply and keep everyone moving forward together longer. That's just the beginning of ideas, and that's only one. There could be a lot more out there, but it's very exciting to have these conversations and know that we're at the beginning of something that's just around the corner and a lot bigger. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, and thank you to our three speakers for your really valuable contributions. We've got about 30 minutes left to go into some Q&A. I'd like to welcome Carlo and Rami back onto the stage. It's going to get a little bit packed up here, but there's lots of different perspectives on offer. Hopefully we've still got Nick as well online in case there are any questions around the work that 2050 is doing, or any of the other reflections that you have from the session. So if you do have a question, please raise your hand. We do have a microphone here. I think I will kick it off though by seeing whether you have a question, Alex, that you mentioned that you were interested in certain aspects that were caught up. So please go ahead.
So Leslie, I really liked what you were saying in terms of how do we leverage these activities to bring greater investment and greater progress. One of the things that we run into a lot, you were saying that GAP recognized that it genuinely drove better business. And what we're seeing that it also genuinely drives future business. But that navigation from Owen's team or Carlo's team to the business development team, they're very different stories that need to be told. And so Carlo, my question I think would be to you first, of how do we do that as sector professionals to work with corporates that are navigating this journey? How do we help you see the leveraging opportunities and create the environment where that's an option for you?
Well, I'm not sure I have an answer, but for sure we know we have problems in driving the awareness of WASH within our organizations. Probably in our cases because it's a very big organization, we have very complex, complicated governance mechanisms. We have multiple layers, corporate functions, markets, zones. I think at the end, what is important is for us transferring the awareness internally from corporate to markets and to factories or to places where we have people who can help. And then by creating local partnerships, we can then bring in experts from the outside to lead the better understanding and putting in place the actions. But what we have learned, for example, when we have implemented the WASH pledge, very critical has always been to train people and to always have a WASH ambassador within the factory. The problem is that this type of issues are driven sometimes into silo mechanisms between.
Maybe speak up a little bit.
Can you hear me? So what I was trying to say is that also one issue we have an issue we have is sometimes we are dealing with this type of problems either from a corporate affairs standpoint or also from a very operational standpoint. That has always been in the past an issue, and we have tried to resolve it by creating multidisciplinary teams and working together. Because when you look at water stewardship, but especially WASH, is very much the technical and the societal elements. So my answer would be, first of all, is an internal sort of issue that we need to simplify the message we bring to the local level, because at least at our place, it's the development is locally happening at the market level, not at the corporate level. And when we have created the awareness, when we created the responsibilities and the ambassadors for WASH, then we can bring in external experts to then try to identify the solutions locally.
Thank you. We'll just see if we can see if there are any questions online. It's a little complicated, but hopefully we will. Is there a chat function? Okay, great. Thanks. So if there are any other questions in the room, please feel free to raise your. Yes, please, over there. Let me get you the microphone. Thank you.
My name is Robert Amini. I'm from DRC. I'm interested in finding out how the WASH program conducted or implemented by Nestlé as part of its corporate social responsibility. How did Nestlé align it with its own business case? That's it. How did your corporate social responsibility related to the WASH sector, is it aligned to your business case?
I think I could give you the very obvious answer, especially for us who are in the water stewardship space. We understand that there is an opportunity to improve WASH within our operations and also in the supply chain, because you have, when you improve health, you have more productive workforce, and you have also, especially at factories, when we have developed the WASH pledge, you have also people are happier, put it this way, because, and I did it personally in the factories, especially when you talk about hygiene. And for us, living in Stockholm or living in developed part of the world is quite straightforward, but in many places where we have factories, you should know that our people, our workers, then they go back to their communities where the WASH conditions are
very different. So when you bring in, for example, the hygiene behaviors and best practice at the factory level, and you give people a much bigger picture for why they have to improve, you know, starting from washing hands and other behaviors, you could see really people are happy to go back to their families, to their communities, and to bring back the same type of practices. So indeed, from a business standpoint, this is very obvious that you have an improvement of health, and then you have also a lot of improvement in the productivity. But where I would see the very important piece is how you link up your presence locally with the livelihoods and the priority communities living outside your immediate sphere of influence at the factory level.
Thank you, Carlo. Maybe Trug, if you have any reflections on the business case for WASH as well from your perspective.
Yeah, I can add to that because when I heard Carlo talking, it really reminded me of a project we did in India that was started actually during COVID, where of course there was a lot of emphasis on hand washing and sanitation practices. And immediately we realized it's like, well, we can do everything within our facility, but we have to extend that to our community. So actually what we did was starting up a program where we said like we are not only working and educating our workers at the facilities itself, but also transfer that to the communities and get to a next level and actually see is how we engage these local communities and support them in ensuring that they have also access to safe drinking water and sanitation and hygiene in their local communities. And with that, basically extending your program to something that's kind of inside your four walls, which is basically, like, especially if you, like, I think with that, the awareness that was from COVID actually helped a lot in that. It's like, we can do everything within the four walls, but if it happens at home, we still have the exact same impact. And so that trigger that people understand all of a sudden is like, no, we have to extend our programs beyond those. And that makes it a very clear driver, and there's no discussion at all about like, do we have to do this or not? It just opens it up. And I think one other point I want to echo is indeed like this importance of these long-term partnerships, because that's also something we have experienced, especially when you start looking at some of our partnerships with CARE in Indonesia, where it's not something that is like a one-year CR investment. It's really part of a long-term commitment. Also because these supply chains, those are supply chains that we will have for a very long time. So these communities, they need to thrive, and to thrive, they need water, they need WASH, and therefore having these long-term partnerships actually help build that out.
Great, thank you very much. Any other questions in the room? Yes, please. I'll just come to you with the mic. Thank you.
Just a question based on something Leslie connected to, which is the broader management of water resources and thinking about how all of your industries use a lot of water, specifically Nestlé, in bottling different beverages. It's all liquid. How are you planning for the future to have sustainable water resources and to sustain the environment long term, seeing as how that might be a challenge since many of your products are water-based?
Thank you. Maybe Carlo, you want to take that one? I can also answer it as well.
Well, it's clear that it's very clear to me that water is essential in everything we are doing, and definitely for us as a food processor and having various type of products, we are very aware that water is a key ingredient or a key resource for our process. And sometimes you may not even know that factories producing coffee products or dairy products, they consume more water than a bottled water factory locally. And it's very core to our history to assess the local risks related to water management. More evident, let's say, is in terms of issues and opportunities in the bottled water sector. But believe me, I've been managing water resources at Nestlé for, I don't even remember how many years. I think we have more hidden issues in other contexts, maybe less under the spotlight. And from my perspective, what we are doing is, since many, many years, trying to put the science at the base of what we are doing. So we are always going through very thorough local assessments of the local availability versus the demand at the catchment level. And we are trying to build, and it's coming back again to the issue is data. Sometimes data are not available in many places around the world. And so we try to fill this gap by building our own data, and we try to, but our mission is trying not to compromise local water resources. So probably you have heard, we have also gone with the Nestlé water business into this journey towards the regeneration of local water cycle. But for me, our history of water stewardship is moving from what we have done historically for decades on being a responsible water user. So trying to be less degenerative, put it this way, in using water resources, understanding that we are not the only one using water within the basket of local water resources, going towards sustainability of water resources management. And this is what we have championed, and this is proven through the Alliance Water Stewardship Standard, implementing and certifying, because this is someone else giving you the proof of your practices. And then now try to champion this regenerative approach, which is the most challenging, because it's trying to even bring in some positive impact, which is very, very challenging. So this is the way we are trying to do. At least I can speak from a technical perspective.
Thank you. I think, Rami, did you want to come in on that point as well?
From the second panel as well, and I wanted to share some reflections
Sure.
from today, especially as Ruth from our corporate team is just joined. So yeah, it's really exciting to see. We were all water stewardship people, right? And we were very humble about the challenge ahead, and understanding the fact that, you know, water stewardship and the case for WASH should be integrated in the corporate at a higher corporate governance level and so on, right? So that's one of the key things that I'm taking out from this. The need for innovation, especially now that there are major opportunities coming ahead here in the EU. There's the non-fiscal reporting directive, there's the due diligence directive, etc. Data and information sharing, that's still a major issue, and there's a big opportunity there for organizations to work together with corporations and with regulators as well, because I mean that's data that's missing on both sides, and some of the innovation companies that you were mentioning. Also, we've heard so many excellent pilots, and we still don't have the economies of scale, and that will come at a later stage when, as we go beyond building awareness into the higher stages of our private sector engagement journey, as I shown earlier. Yeah, I mean, just going forward, I really wanted to say that the future is not as bleak as we think. It's a very positive future. There's a lot of things going on. There's excellent pilots, so much work that's been highlighted. And thank you for highlighting the work with GAP as well, because in our experience working with the textile sector, that has also reduced, I mean, having WASH at workplaces and in the communities have reduced absenteeism, increased health, productivity, and gave so many different kinds of returns on that kind of investment. So yeah, I just want to say, like, I'm really impressive presentations, and yeah, keep the faith.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Okay, any further questions from our audience? Yes, please. If I could just take the mic. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. Nicole Tanner with the World Wildlife Fund. I have a question regarding scaling collaboration. So there's a lot of groups out there that are focused on landscape initiatives from a conservation or a water resources standpoint. There's a lot of groups out there that we've heard from today that are focused on the WASH aspects. But I've heard a lot of need to bring these two kind of approaches together. Do you have any examples that you can share of best practice for how groups convening collective action on water stewardship in a landscape and WASH in a landscape can come together, or recommendations or requests that you have of us doing so?
Thank you.
Okay, I guess I'll take that one. Excuse me? Oh, yeah. Yeah, so, and I say this because actually a program that I'm working on right now is really intentionally trying to bring together WASH and WRM. And in that, GWP is partnering closely with UNICEF on the ground. Now, I think what's been interesting coming at this from the WASH side, because again, that is actually my background prior to GWP, is really seeing the WASH community starting to understand that, you know, access today does not guarantee access tomorrow, and that investments of today do not secure the water resources that need to be there to ensure supply tomorrow. So we've seen the WASH community, and those of us who have been in it, have understood and sort of really been coming up to speed on how to partner and what that can kind of look like. But actually, the reality, which I think you're touching on here, is that partnering is hard. Partnering is really hard when you take two different kinds of sector experts who've been doing their work for a few decades. And even if we can come here to Stockholm and we can talk about this, actually translating that into messages down to our colleagues who are doing the work in the field also takes a lot of time and care. And I think that's an area where we all need to invest more, is really bringing everybody along. So it's not just a conversation that we have here, but that we make sure that these conversations actually go all the way down. Because if people are focused on implementation, they're not necessarily involved in these higher level conversations. And so then you just say, okay, no, you're gonna start partnering with WASH. And they're like, what? I'm like, why? Like, I'm doing my thing. And partnering takes time, right? You lose control because you can't control your deadlines. We're all against a lot of pressures on deadlines. So it becomes this, I'm supposed to go partner with this organization because everyone tells me that this is now important, but I don't necessarily see it. And now it takes me longer to move anything forward because I've got to wait on them to be ready. So I think these are, and this is not unique per se to WASH and WRM. It is the conversation we're all having right now in this room. But I think that that's actually a really important first step. If we want to think about these things holistically, and we decide that because we're talking to each other and learning from each other, coming to these conversations, we need to actually invest in making sure that all the way down, this information is mutually understood, and then also invest ourselves in helping facilitate those conversations, not just magically expecting that because we say that this should be happening in country, that it actually does, and actually really taking and building in the time for that genuine collaboration. And that's why, you know, as we were highlighting the importance of long-term relationships, right? Because this takes time to build. This is trust. This is, you know, allowing yourself to be vulnerable, talking about risks to you and your organization. I mean, there's a lot in that. So I think we shouldn't expect too much too fast, but really invest in nurturing those kind of relationships and allowing them to have the kind of success that we all know is around the corner. But it's still there. You know, we have to build it. We have to make it happen.
A little bit to that with an example. And for me, like everything you're saying makes, like I totally recognize that picture, but I think it stresses the importance of that local ownership. Because once you go to the very, very local level, you won't hear them talking about WASH, or that you won't hear them talking about water resource management or depleted aquifers. They're facing a situation on the ground in their local communities, and they want solutions. They want holistic solutions that address their needs. And the moment that you are able to translate your big corporate programs that prioritize and your partnerships into something that's relevant at that local level, that is when it becomes very easy to adapt. However, you get to the point that then it's very local and it's very hard to scale. And so that is, I feel like, the ultimate crux where we are in, is saying, on one hand, we want scalable programs. On the other hand, we need holistic but local solutions. And one way at Cargill how we've bridged some of that gap is indeed like these parallel tracks where we work with Global Water Challenge a lot. And what they do is like they leverage their global network to also then basically enable these local partnerships and actually go into in depth with these conversations with our local teams. So today we're having our teams in Brazil connected because we have a large footprint in Brazil, and these rural communities face these challenges. But then again, Brazil is very large, so how do you get to that local level to actually build that? And this is where a larger partnership can still help that. While in parallel, you need something that even bridges a larger scale. So I'll leave it here.
I was also just wanted to add something that I think we can each do, building on what Leslie and Truk were saying, is around messaging. And this is also, I think, what Carlo was saying of how do we tell our stories in a way that can speak beyond ourselves and can speak locally or in different business departments. And Leslie and I spend a lot of time on calls with Sanitation and Water for All and speaking about messaging and really aligning as a sector behind 3 proof points or something, or very simplified messaging that can move beyond the borders of CB, World Water Week, and our acronyms and all of that. I think that also will facilitate partnerships and people understanding what the heck we're talking about.
Great, thank you. Yes, thank you for the question and for those really interesting reflections. Does anybody else have a question in the audience at this stage? Yes, please.
My name's Ruth from Water Aid. Not a question, but a reflection, because that was a really important question I think that you raised. And the mantra that WWF always say is, I know you're not WWF anymore, sorry, but WWF says, take off your PIN badges. So all the NGOs, we're competing for the same budgets from the same sort of companies. So we take off our PIN badges and work a little bit more effectively together. And then equally, I'd say it back to the companies. Let's get companies to work together in the same basins and the same sectors, and then we get scale and we can leverage. So it's just an additional reflection.
Thank you. Yes. Great. Okay. I'm just going to go back on stage. I will quickly check if there are any questions in the online chat. If not, I have maybe just a question to each of our panelists as a reflection, a wrap up on today's session. So firstly, thank you very much for your participation. I think it's been a very interesting run through of an important and complicated topic. I guess my question would be sort of, what does the future look like? What does good look like? What are the limits and opportunities for company action on this topic? And if we could start off maybe, without wanting to put you on the spot too much, Alex, but if you could, I'll give you like a few more seconds to think about that. If you could maybe provide us with your thoughts on the discussion today and sort of that role for companies and in the context of those other actors that need to be involved as well. Yes, please.
The word, I'm trying to not anticipate what everyone else will say. I don't want to take their points, but for one thing that I really loved about the conversation today, and I think is just the word to keep thinking about as we embark on the things ahead of us, is just leverage. How do we take one thing and have the direct impact there, but also leverage that by partnering to have exponentially greater impacts, perhaps in a slightly more indirect way?
Well, on my side, I think for what we have basically started to share today, we are at the point where we are trying to transition to the next 10 years in WASH at Nestlé. So we are very eager to understand what is coming out from the gap assessment that we are currently having underway. And yes, I think that for future at least on our level, is probably to understand a bit better how we can scale up our efforts in the agricultural supply chain, because this is very much the piece that we need to understand better, starting from the due diligence approach, understanding what are the boundaries for our responsibilities, then implementing action. And partnership, by the way, is one of the enablers that we have identified in our human rights framework. So partnership will have definitely a very significant part in our actions for the next 10 years.
Yeah, one part that I haven't brought up, but I'd like to stress here is, especially as I hear a lot about like how we scaling collective action, but also working across these different elements of WASH and water resources management and availability of resources. So the Water Resilience Coalition is a group of private sector companies, and really as part of their pathways of driving scale is really bringing together the expertise of these different companies, but also of their different partnerships. So this is where you see in this initiative like what Gab did on Women and Water, is to say, how can we scale that by bringing these companies together and then leveraging their expertise. But also this is where innovative financing solutions, these blended financing solutions are brought forward, and then many companies can buy into this. But again, it's also a platform where we're looking at how can we leverage our expertise to engage in our agricultural supply chain and provide solutions. So these coalitions I see as very promising, because from the very, very onset of the launch of that coalition, it was the ambition to bring together that collective action to scale, and together with raising the ambition to provide holistic solutions, not on one element, but all three, like availability, quality, and accessibility.
So I've said a lot already about partnerships, so I'll actually say something slightly different. And this is actually more about complementarity, right? Because we have a number of private sector representatives here and in the room, or that we've been talking about, who aren't here, who have a lot of genuine, really good expertise and understanding of business, right? And then those of us on the organizational side, business is not necessarily the first thing that we're thinking of, right? We're thinking of the human outcomes. We're thinking of the environmental outcomes. We're not necessarily understanding the best way to develop a business case, right? And so you talk about actually, when you look at sort of all of the finance that is out there and available, it's there. We don't need to come up with more, but we need projects, we need plans that are actually investment worthy, right? So then you can also see this kind of collaboration coming up with organizations that know how to do business. It's their job, and they can work collaboratively with us to develop these solutions that actually serve their purposes, serve us, and serve the greater good, that could actually then move us forward and access what's ready there to be taken if we could actually come up with the right way of developing it out together. So I'll stop at that.
Reflections already, but I'll just recap with 2 points: the importance of thinking holistically, and you're right to point out how WASH and water resources management integrate together. You can't solve WASH without taking a broader holistic approach to water supply, for example. And you can't solve sanitation without solving water, and you can't solve hygiene without solving water either. So, I mean, that's important. The other maybe the other point that I wanted to reiterate is the importance of partnerships. There are quite a lot of interesting partnerships going on, but they're just not enough, and not at the scale of impact that we want to see. And on the business case to WASH, I think I'd like, maybe Ruth, maybe you can say a few things really quick from your end. I'm sorry, I'm hijacking the scene. No, but I really just wanted to remind everybody that at 11 o'clock, 257 was the room, right? We'll be presenting an update on our business case to WASH with impact stories from across the field. So please join us, and let's continue this conversation.
Great, thank you. Thank you, and thanks to all of our speakers for your reflections. It's exactly 10:30, so we'll call it a day. Just in terms of next steps from Nestlé, we are still formulating our draft action plan. We're hoping to consult on some of that information in the next couple of months. So watch this space. And we will publish that before the end of this year and look forward to implementing it with many partners, and including those in the room and watching online today. So thanks for coming, and have a great World Water Week. Thank you.